Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is an academic, a distinguished economist. He's been a chief economic advisor to the government of India. He's been a professor. He's taught at the universities of Oxford, Sussex, the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta, and Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is a member of the World Commission on the Social Implications of globalization. I'm not sure I've got the title right, but that is the intent of the Commission, and most recently as the Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi, from which he has most recently demitted office. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Dr. Deepak Nayyar.
Thank you, Rajiv.
George Bernard Shaw had said, he who can does and he who can teaches. You've been a teacher and you've been an economist. You've held so many different offices. Most recently as Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi. That was in a sense an opportunity, a context to hands-on do something, demonstrate many of the ideas that you had had. What has been the most sort of satisfying dimension of that experience?
It's a difficult question because it's a wide canvas. But let me say the most rewarding dimension of that experience has been to serve and nurture a public institution to which I owe much of what I am in life. But that may be too abstract an answer. I think the most rewarding dimension of that experience, in a concrete sense, has been the academic renaissance, has been the structural transformation, not simply of curricula or courses, but also of what is taught, how it is taught, so that the teaching-learning process is not something that is characterized by a stagnation, but the teaching-learning process is something that is dynamic, that does not take away the joy or the creativity from learning. And for someone who has spent much of his professional life in the classroom, that has been a source of both pride and joy.
I also meant in the sense that you've been a bureaucrat, you've been a teacher, you tend to look at sort of larger macro issues and are frequently sort of once or twice at least removed from the realities that you're talking about. It's working with data, it's working with information, it's working with policy. And you go in here into the nitty-gritty, the turbulence also of a university. It is more than just an aside to say that the Delhi University Teachers Association celebrated your departure from the university. So there is so much that you're up against. You're up against basic fundamental resistance to change, processes that have become ossified, the hands-on engaging.
Rajiv, I suppose I have always lived life in two parts. There is Deepak, the academic, who has lived in the classroom, who has lived in the world of research, who's lived in the world of writing. But from time to time, I have left this ivory tower to work in the government, to work at the University of Delhi, and indeed, long years ago, to work even in the Indian Administrative Service when I worked in a district. Now, most people in academia do not understand why I leave and go away from time to time, just as most people in the public domain have never understood, have often been puzzled by my return to the classroom. I must say to you, at one level, I feel perfectly at home in both worlds. The classroom is my natural home, so I go back to it, but I enjoy this hands-on world, the real world, enormously. Although I find that I return, whenever I do, to academia richer for the experience. But being an academic never really trains you to come to decisions, because we are so trained to analyze things at length and then come to conclusions which may be ambivalent. But working in public policy, working in a public institution is a completely different world. The University of Delhi, I have always maintained, is a miniature Republic of India. It is almost as difficult to govern. And in these 5 years, I think I lived through bad times, even ugly times,
So what
difficult
what
times.
were the bad and ugly times?
but good times too. You know, it is public institutions in India are characterized by laws of inertia on the one hand and an embedded vested interest on the other. And therefore, the path of least resistance is possibly the easiest, because there are no ripples.
So
No
give us
one
a
will
specific
notice.
example. So what was this ugly, difficult time?
Well, there were, you know, we can think of the fact that for the first year when I was Vice Chancellor, there were always demonstrations outside my office, slogans, loudspeakers, and what democracy in India has become. It is about a right to protest, but there is a disproportionality in that right to protest, and it is certainly erosive of anything that you might describe as a work ethic. Now, when I arrived, populism had taken root, and demonstrations were a means of obtaining what people wanted. Those who shouted loudest had the voice and had the influence, and the establishment responded to that, as they often do in terms of pressures. My response to it was really a response that demonstrating groups found puzzling. A response which was that if what you want is justified, warranted, I shall make sure that you get it. If it is unjustified, unwarranted, so long as I'm the Vice Chancellor, you're not going to get it. You may sit here for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month,
So what
1
were
year.
some of the techniques and strategies and devices that you used to counter this? In fact, this is sort of really the unfolding that I was seeking from you, is that what are the lessons from this experience that you carry forward to the macro level, and you have just sort of talked about precisely this dimension as to how populism tends to often dominate and influence serious, considered decision making. And this is a lesson for all of India. So what is the lesson that you carry back?
Well, the lesson that I would draw from this, I'm not sure where I carry it back to and to what purpose, but the lesson I draw from this is that individuals can make a difference to institutions, that it is possible to resist both populism and cynicism, that if this is done with a firmness that is combined with fairness, it is acceptable because it carries a credibility, and that even in these situations, which can sometimes turn ugly, there are two priors I have always had. First, that there is good in every human being, we have to find it. And second, that a better world is possible. Now, there is no magic wand, and there are no messiahs. Transforming public institutions is a complex process. I think at the University of Delhi, we succeeded in substantial measure, but not because of an individual. Individuals can make a difference to institutions. Leadership is important, but I believe teamwork is much more important. And the transformation that we have brought about at the University of Delhi, both in the world of letters and in the world of reality, would simply not have been possible had it not been for an ever-widening circle of concerned members of the university community who participated in and contributed to this transformation in their respective domains.
We'll come back to that in a moment. You're watching a conversation with Professor Deepak Nayyar, till recently Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Dr. Deepak Nayyar, till recently Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi. The ideal university that you were striving for Delhi University to become, what would some of its elements be?
Well, let me at the outset say that striving for excellence is a continuous process, so that destinations and objectives are not given once and for all, but they must move up over time. And what we have done at the University of Delhi is at best a modest beginning, and we have miles to go. If we were to think of the ideal university, it would be very difficult to define. And there are two ways we can approach it. First, we can think of, say, the University of Delhi as a role model or path setter for other universities in India. And second, we can think of the University of Delhi that is at par with the best in the world.
Well, let's take it sort of
now
out of the context, perhaps, of the University of Delhi, and look at what do you see as the role of universities in 2005 and beyond.
The spread of education in society is at the foundations of development in countries that are latecomers to industrialization. That is one thing we learn from both theory and experience. And in this process, if primary education provides the foundation, it is higher education that provides the cutting edge. Now, in the world of higher education, we can think of islands of excellence, say in India, the IITs or the IIMs. But such islands of excellence never add up to a continent of excellence. Universities are the lifeblood of higher education, for it is universities and universities alone that provide educational opportunities for people at large. Now, in 2005, as we think big and we think long, most people are beginning to see India as a global player, if not a global leader, in 2025, in 2050. But this is simply not going to happen unless we create educational opportunities for people at large. And that is really what universities must be doing. Now, if they are ideal worlds, they are not simply about the classroom. They are not simply about conferring degrees. They are about learning outside the classroom. They are about performance beyond the examinations. And they are, above all, about making good citizens of civil society. It is universities that are going to shape our future tomorrow. So, my ideal of a university is one that imparts education in a way that it is conducive to learning. For asking the right questions is just as important as finding the right answers.
You know, the logic of the market is that you know, the demand pull from the consumer is going to impact and influence change. But that is not often, and in the case of education, the most appropriate mechanism to provide the most appropriate education for society, for community, for development, for research. At least in India, the perception is that the demand pull is really for vocationalization. You know, can I get the kind of education that's going to get me a lucrative job, that's going to make me more efficient in a fairly narrow, productive sense. When I say productive, I mean technically productive in terms of being able to earn money and in a mechanistic way. Whereas we've had this more sort of more romantic notion of the ideal of education that, you know, you were talking about, the pursuit of knowledge, of excellence, of ideas, of the imagination.
You're absolutely right. I could not agree with you more. And those are the dangers that markets and globalization represent for the world of education. If markets were to determine the courses that universities teach, we would all be studying life sciences, law, or management. Nobody would study history, philosophy, linguistics, or even theoretical physics. And that would be a terrible world. If markets were to determine the research that we do at universities, we would do research in just a few disciplines where life sciences would dominate, management would enter the domain, but not much else. And therefore, if universities begin to shape curricula in terms of what the market demands, or if universities begin to decide upon research agenda in terms of what the market wants, it would be a disaster. Universities are, in the ultimate analysis, about a liberal intellectual tradition that they must continue over decades, indeed over centuries, to teach classical languages, to teach philosophy, to teach history, to teach mathematics. And if the universities in the world were to abandon this, because this is not where the money is, this is not what money is provided for, it would lead to a world that would not be conducive to learning. Universities are ultimately about the world of ideas, bewildering ideas, romantic ideas, exciting ideas, even crazy ideas. It is a world where ideas must be allowed to blossom, to flourish as knowledge advances.
More of that in a moment. You're watching a conversation with a former chief economic advisor to the government of India, and I use that as the blurb to describe my guest, because it's that kind of role that we'll come back to talking about after this short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Dr. Deepak Nayyar, who has served as the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, that's the kind of economist's role, or sort of an aspiration for an economist in a way, where you can concretely begin to impact, influence national policy. If you were to go back into that role, or if you were to become, I don't know what, chairman of the University Grants Commission, where you're able to influence at the macro level, what happens to education in India, what are the kind of initiatives that you would take or urge governments in order to achieve some of the objectives that we've been talking about? You've done a sort of hands-on university. Now, what's a macro thing that could influence this aspiration?
The most important macro correction that I would urge those who make decisions to introduce is that we must get away from a short-termism that characterizes public policy. We think of the next month, the next year, and at best the next elections. In the world of education, I believe the time has come to think big and to think long, which means that our horizon today should not be 2010. It should be 2025, 2050, so that the Government of India, in the Ministry of Education, or the University Grants Commission, should stop engaging in micromanagement of institutions. They can, and indeed they should, set parameters for the governance of such institutions, and there should be accountability on the part of institutions that are supported by the people in terms of taxpayers' money. But at the end of the day, this is not their role. They should be thinking about the areas in which higher education should move, stretching over a span of 25 years. They should be beginning to think of innovations in methods of teaching and learning. They should be beginning to think of new domains and new intersections that are going to be important 25 years from now.
So what would you like them to think for education 25 years later?
Let me give you an example from the past. We could extrapolate it to the future. The founding fathers of the Republic, say among them Jawaharlal Nehru, had a view about the importance of higher education in independent India. Not in 1950, but in 1975 or 2000. And it was that which was responsible for the creation of universities, for the establishment of centers of excellence, or indeed even setting up the Indian Institutes of Technology and the Indian Institutes of Management. Now, in the early 2000s, everybody has convinced themselves that it is economic reform introduced in the 1990s that has produced this wonderful transformation as the world sees India through very different eyes. But I would ask the same people to recognize the importance of the investment that the founding fathers of the Republic made in creating this foundation of higher education institutions, which has given us the comparative advantage. So that when V.K.R.V. Rao established the Delhi School of Economics in 1948, economics was but an infantile subject. Or when we set up IITs or IIMs in the early 60s, most people did not understand what they meant. Now, if we are thinking big and if we are thinking long, should we not be thinking of setting up schools of information technology of the sort that Stanford has just done, a 4-year professional program? Should we not be thinking of setting up schools of genomics, schools of design? There is in all of India one National Institute of Design. Our education in design per capita or in relation to market demands is negligible. And yet you look at people from India whose creativity is sort of overtaking the world of design. Now these are examples. Everybody's examples would be different. But I think that those who live in the world of education must have this capacity to think with a long-term horizon, because education shapes society and economy or even polity in ways that are difficult to imagine or contemplate in advance. But it is critical, and that is something we have almost given up doing, Rajiv.
You've just sort of given up or retired, demitted office as Vice Chancellor. You're on sabbatical before you go back to your appointment at Jawaharlal Nehru University. This sabbatical year, this intense hands-on engaging with education, you have many other passions and concerns as an economist, as a teacher, and globalization is one of them. What do you look to for yourself during this year?
Well, first things first, I am 58 years old, not ready to retire. I have simply completed my tenure as Vice Chancellor at the University of Delhi. I have already returned to the Department of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So I'm back in my ivory tower. It's just that in the coming academic year, I have a sabbatical which is going to give me time and space for research. Now, it seems to me that this year is critical. I enjoy research, I enjoy writing, and therefore I want to catch up on this wonderful world of ideas that I did not leave altogether, for I continue to write, but a world that I had less and less time for. And this is something that has always been a source of joy, a source of satisfaction for me. I look forward to it. I hope to be able to write a book about globalization, a theme that has engaged my attention for some years in its many dimensions. There will never be a magnum opus, but I hope to write something that would be exciting for me to write and stimulating for others to read.
Any sort of, aspirations, sort of, how do I put this elegantly, dreams, hopes of a different kind of office, another opportunity somewhere to do something hands-on, engaged, like the university?
No, look, Rajiv, I live the present. I do not contemplate the future. Life unfolds in ways that are unexpected, in ways that are
what will make you really
bewildering.
excited and happy and pop the champagne?
Well, I would be really excited if a year from now I am able to produce a book that is received by the profession and by readers and received well. To me, that would be a source of great joy.
Hopefully we'll have you back on the program to talk about that. Thank you very much. This has been a great honor.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thanks very much.
Thank you.